Hi there, welcome along to the final episode in this Transatlantic vlog series. Coming up, Royal Caribbean's Symphony of the Seas reaches land for the first time in 10 days. I explore Nassau in the Bahamas for my very first time there, and I take a shore excursion to a private island. So join me on the journey for the final day of this 14-day cruise before we reach Florida. Coming up also, I'll share with you a breakdown of some of the main costs of this transatlantic cruise, and finally I'll provide you with some insights into some key considerations if you're thinking of taking a transatlantic cruise. So in recent times, Nassau in the Bahamas generally hasn't had the best reputation for safety. Now, as a solo traveller, I was slightly reluctant about exploring the area, and instead my main focus for the day was doing a ship-organised shore excursion to the Blue Lagoon private island. But first, I decided, as it was my first time to the Bahamas, I should make the effort to venture on shore in Nassau for at least a short visit. So, Symphony of the Seas was the largest of the 5 ships in port today, and it docked at the furthest dock from land. Now, I was pleasantly surprised with the environment that I found at the end of the dock area, as the new cruise port area, or at least the remodelled cruise port area, was quite pleasant. So in venturing outside of the cruise port village, there were inevitably various people offering activities, tours, taxis. Now, I didn't find them too intimidating or aggressive, and I simply said a polite no thank you, and continued walking. In total, I gave myself about 45 minutes to explore the main downtown area. So I headed towards Parliament Square for a quick photo opportunity, and then walked along Bay Street and headed to the Straw Market. Now, much as it may be loved by bargain hunters, just the whole higgledy-piggledy nature of it just wasn't my cup of tea. So I made my way back along the street that runs beside the cruise port, and I was back at the ship in plenty of time to join the queue for my shore excursion. So incidentally, the queuing area for that was actually on the dock and not on the ship, as might normally be the case. So my shore excursion was the Blue Lagoon Deluxe Beach Break, and each passenger as they joined the queue was required to sign a waiver. We were then led to a 2-deck open boat, and that was just a short distance away from the ship, and it was still within the secure area of the dock. So once everyone was on board, we set sail and travelled past Atlantis and past all those many luxury homes en route to the private island. So my shore excursion was about 5 hours in duration. Now that included travel time to and from the island. It left plenty of time to explore around the island, to experience the beach, to have lunch, which was included as part of the package price, and also to have a look at where the dolphin enclosure was. Now, there were other packages available in conjunction with the beach break that I opted for, so you could add on a swim with dolphins experience, for example. There were also some other upgrade packages for anybody who wanted to access more exclusive areas of the island, so basically meant to be quieter areas, nicer sun loungers, that kind of thing. But really, I didn't feel the need to upgrade. There was plenty of beach space, it wasn't particularly crowded, there were plenty of sun loungers available in the area that was included in the standard deluxe package. So as I mentioned, I booked the excursion through the cruise line, and it came in at a cost of €80 or $85. So being my first time experiencing the Bahamas, I decided to stick with the safety of being on a ship organised shore excursion. But I could have purchased it independently directly from Blue Lagoon Island Tours, and that would have been at a cost of, I think it was $70 US. So once back on board Symphony of the Seas, it was perfect weather to spend some time on deck, ship spotting all the neighbours at the other docks, before needing to return to my room, sadly, for the dreaded task of packing.
I've just been told that they are going to be conducting a medical evacuation. Once they have completed this medical debark, Liberty of the Seas will then get underway and we'll follow the Liberty of the Seas out from the port of Nassau. However, I'm not able to leave while they are alongside. There's not enough room for me to squeeze between the Paradise Island and the Liberty of the Seas. So Liberty of the Seas is conducting a medical debark, and once they're underway, we should be able to get underway for everybody. Thank you very much for your patience.
And after the transatlantic crossing, we have arrived in Fort Lauderdale. It's 7:30 in the morning and it already feels very, very warm. So moving on to look at the cost of my cruise. So firstly, I'd point out that I booked this almost a year in advance of the sailing. And I did notice that as the sailing date approached, the prices went up quite a bit. So if you've seen my first episode in this vlog series, you'll know that I sailed in a standard balcony cabin. I was travelling solo, but it was a standard for double occupancy. So inevitably, my fare included a fairly hefty single supplement. I booked directly with Royal Caribbean, and that was through their European website, and I paid a total fare of €2,458. So that works out at about $2,790. Now that included €123 of taxes and port fees. In addition to that, I opted to purchase the classic soda package, and that came in at a total cost of €164 or $185. And I also purchased the Voom Surf and Stream Wi-Fi package, so that's the fast one. And that was a total of €265 or $310. Now that was for the entire duration of the cruise, and I'm happy to report that the Wi-Fi held up very well across the Atlantic, including for streaming purposes and for uploading, so I was quite pleased with that. Now, just before I wrap up this final episode in this vlog series, I thought it might be useful to run through some of what my key considerations were when deciding to take this transatlantic trip. Hopefully, it may help you to decide if a transatlantic cruise is the right option for you. So firstly, you really need to ask yourself, do you enjoy sea days? So I definitely wouldn't recommend a transatlantic cruise as a first cruise, or for anyone who has only ever cruised on short 3 or 4 day cruises. You really need to be sure that you're going to enjoy what you're getting into. Secondly, there's the practical question of, do you have enough vacation time? So at a minimum, crossing the Atlantic on board a ship will take at least 7 to 8 days, and the majority of cruises will actually take almost 2 weeks. Now that brings me on to the next consideration. What type of transatlantic crossing do you want to do? So for those who may want to use the terminology in exactly the right manner, a transatlantic crossing can really only be used as the term if you were crossing on an ocean-going liner, and there's only one ocean-going liner still existing in the world. That's Cunard's Queen Mary 2. So for the majority of the year, the Queen Mary 2 does a straightforward route from Southampton in the UK to New York, and it takes either 7 or 8 days as it transits eastwards and then westwards on alternate weeks. So the second option to sail across the Atlantic is a repositioning cruise. So repositioning cruises occur generally twice yearly as cruise lines move their ships either from the United States to Europe or back again from Europe to the United States. There are also a small number of cruise lines that operate transatlantics between Europe and South America on the same seasonal basis. The eastbound crossing to Europe occurs in the springtime as the ships move to Europe for the summer season, and those same ships then return westwards to the United States or South America in the autumn. Key considerations for a spring crossing are the fact that it's usually colder and you will lose time as you cross, as time changes occur several times and it'll result in some days being just 23 hours. But on the positive side, it's not hurricane season. Now, if you choose to do a repositioning cruise in the autumn, generally the water temperatures are warmer, the weather is warmer, but you absolutely run the risk of being impacted by the precarious hurricane season. So that runs from June to November. Another consideration is the route that you want to take. Now, particularly if you're using this as a means of getting to a destination that you plan on exploring once you arrive in either the States or Europe. So a true transatlantic crossing on the Queen Mary 2 will take you to New York, and there are also a number of repositioning cruises which will take you from Europe to New York. However, the majority of cruises will usually depart from Florida and will return to Florida after its season in Europe. There are a number of points of departure, and on arrival in Europe, some ships may head to Southampton in the UK, for example, and they'll be particularly the ones doing Northern European and Norwegian fjords itineraries. Other ships will head to their summer home ports in the Mediterranean. Now, the next consideration is very important, and that's the actual ship choice. So for me personally, I'm a big fan of Royal Caribbean's Oasis class ships, so I felt that Symphony of the Seas was the perfect choice. Now, I enjoy quiet time in my own space, and my balcony cabin certainly provided that. But otherwise, the ship was filled with plenty of activities and entertainment. There was really good quality, very enjoyable production shows. So there was the ice shows, the Broadway-style production show of Hairspray. There were great guest acts, there was comedians, musicians, magicians, you name it, it was pretty much on this cruise. So in addition to that, Symphony of the Seas has a wonderful array of dining options, from the main dining rooms to the buffet, the Solarium Bistro, and a whole host of snack options also. And they're all included in the cruise fare. There's also several specialty dining restaurants, including the always enjoyable Jamie's Italian, and of course the famous Chops Grill, so that's the onboard steakhouse. Now, while the choice of ship is entirely personal, it's such an important decision to make, as you will be spending so much time on the ship and you have to be sure that it's a choice that you're going to be happy with. And speaking of choices, that brings me on to the subject of the cabin. Now, while I have often availed of reduced price cruise fares by opting for a guarantee cabin, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically where you allow the cruise line to select your cabin as opposed to you selecting it, and it may often be assigned to you at quite short notice before you actually travel. But leaving it to the luck of the draw on a guarantee cabin was not something of interest to me for this transatlantic cruise. In my view, a transatlantic is one cruise that you really should devote quite an amount of time to studying deck plans and deciding where the best location is for you. In my case, for this cruise, I chose a cabin which was between forward and midship, and it was on deck 7. So being near the middle of the ship and on a deck that wasn't particularly high up, it was a location which is often recommended as being one where the motion of the ocean will be minimised. So as I've mentioned earlier in another episode, I carefully selected the cabin to ensure that it was in a location which also had cabins on the deck above and below. And I also specifically selected a cabin which was on the port side. So that's the left-hand side of the ship as you're facing forward. And that basically meant that as we headed west across the Atlantic, I had the benefit of my balcony having wonderful sunshine. So being on the sunny side of the ship for much of the crossing. And on Symphony of the Seas, my cabin was also just a short walk down 2 decks to the Royal Promenade, so that's where so much of the daily ship life happens, and it was also just 1 deck up to some of the dining venues in Central Park. On the subject of ports, do bear in mind transatlantic cruises are not port intensive, but you can choose your itinerary wisely. There are some itineraries which will usually have a number of port of calls which are grouped together at either the beginning or the end of the cruise. So that means that you could get to visit some of your favourite ports or visit ones on your bucket list. The majority of repositioning cruises from Europe tend to include a number of ports before you actually leave Europe. So if you watched the previous vlogs in this particular series, you will have seen that on this trip, after we departed from Barcelona, I also visited Valencia and Cadiz, both in Spain, and that was before we set sail for our 9 days at sea. If you're travelling in the opposite direction, going eastbound, you will usually have a selection of ports towards the end of the journey, again once you get to Europe. And in addition, there are some cruises which may also have port stops further out in the Atlantic. So that will either be in Bermuda after about 2 days at sea after you've left the US, or alternatively it will be slightly closer to Europe where you may have a stop in the Azores, with Madeira being a particularly popular one of those. And as with any travel plan, one key consideration would be cost. For me, that was certainly no different. You will have seen earlier in this vlog how much this cruise actually cost me. So travelling solo on a cruise, I am reconciled to paying a single supplement. But even at that, for the duration of the cruise being 14 days, I still found it to be quite good value once everything is taken into account, including food and entertainment and so on. Typically, transatlantic or other repositioning cruises have been good value. That was up until recent years. There used to be a very limited market of cruisers who had the time to actually take such a leisurely cruise. Ships used to sail under capacity and cruise prices were quite low, often with really good last-minute bargains to be availed of. But over the past 2 to 3 years, particularly since cruising rebounded after the COVID-19 pandemic, good value offered by repositioning cruises seems to have become very much an open secret. Ships are now sailing almost full and bargain prices are much harder to find. Now, that wraps things up for me on this transatlantic cruise. If you haven't already watched the previous episodes in this series, consider having a look back where I show you my balcony cabin room tour and I show you some of the ports of call in Europe and also what it was like to spend 9 days at sea. For now, thank you as always for watching, and if you enjoyed the content, please consider hitting the like button. And if you'd like to stay informed on other cruise vlogs or cruise news in general, please hit the subscribe button. Bye for now, and thank you for watching.